All right, I'm going to call BUHS number 6, BUHS number 6 meeting to order at 6:03 on Monday, January 7th. And we're going to start off with a public information session in relation to the budget for FY20. And right now, Frank Rucker is passing out copies of that budget to the folks in the room. So everybody should have one of those. And I will turn it over to Bob, the chair of the Finance Committee, and Frank to go ahead and go through things.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to do is just go back to the beginning of the budget process real quickly and give a brief description of where we started and how we got to where we are today. This fall, October-ish, we start the process by requesting the administrators to begin to assemble their budget, working with their staff. This is either the 9th or 10th year in a row, and I went back and looked through some of my notes, that we've asked them to maintain level service and as close to possible or level expenditures. And particularly discretionary items are to be very carefully reviewed in all areas, and they once again did that. They presented us with a budget. We worked on it for quite some time with the Finance Committee. Administrators met with the Finance Committee and reviewed their individual units. We'll talk about each of the three and plus the district-wide a little bit in a minute. So when we got to December, we were in the place that we've typically come to be in December, and that is waiting for the state to provide us with numbers so we can figure out our what's called equalized pupils, and that will also then lead to whether or not we are below the spending per pupil threshold, and then drops down to impact the tax rate. So as has been frequently the case, these numbers, the last of the numbers came in probably within the last few days.
That's right.
Yeah, which is quite a scramble, particularly for Frank. And I have to start off with saying that there was yeoman's work to keep up with us and get it ready for where we are today, and we appreciate that. So, as I said at the last meeting, no matter what the handout is, everybody's going to look at the back page to see what the number is at the end. But you don't look at the back page because it's on the front. This time around, we outfoxed you. So what I'd like to do is I'll go down through, talk about the general expenditure appropriation summary and a little bit about reserve funds, and then we'll look at each individual unit briefly. We can have questions, I guess, along the way if you wish, or when we finish up. There's a couple of topics that I'll ask Frank to address, that particularly where it gets down to figuring out yield and the equalized students and the impact on the tax rates for the town. I think after 15 years, I've gotten to the point where I kind of understand it, but nowhere near the way he can explain it, that's for sure. So if we start with looking at the cover page, it breaks down the units that we are responsible for. District-wide, just a reminder, being the things that cut across all three or two or three units of the middle school, career center, and high school. And that would be such things as plant maintenance, safety, then music. There's quite a few things that cut across all three operating units, and that's the district-wide. And if you look down on that first page, about 6 lines down, it has the total of district-wide expenditures up just slightly, with 0.1% different from last year. And we'll, in a minute, we'll look at what some of the key factors in that budget are. Then we go next to the senior high budget, and the senior high budget also includes tuition to the Career Center, because many or most of the Career Center students are BUHS students, and therefore the high school pays tuition to the Career Center. And between that and our senior high expenditures, we are showing a 5.4% increase in the senior high. And we'll talk about the reasons for that in a minute. Middle school BAMS, that has a 5.6% increase, and we'll also review what's involved with that. I'll also ask that the administrators can clarify when we get to staff changes, which are not many, but they will be glad to explain those to us. Then at the bottom of the upper half is the Career Center, and that's, as you can see, is basically level, 0.6% increase. And if you roll that all together, it yields a budget of $25,221,000, and which is a 2.6% increase. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that salary and benefits are a huge portion of our budget, somewhere in the 80% range, I believe. And we are in the third year of a negotiated contract. Second year, okay. So those numbers are pretty much preset for us, but that being such a big part of the budget, it definitely has an impact on the increase, because there would be an increase projected for or budgeted, agreed to for this year. Also, we have health insurance, which is, did it end up at 10% being the number?
Yeah.
Yeah. 10% increase, and as you know, health insurance is a pretty healthy, no pun intended, part of our budget. So 2.6%. And on the bottom half of this page shows our general reserve fund and our capital reserve fund. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, we started working on a capital fund. It was still a fairly new facility, but knowing that things were going to start needing attention, we started salting away some money in the capital fund, and we've had some withdrawals and some years that we didn't put money in, some that we have. And then that's on the right-hand column, and the left-hand column is our general reserve fund, and the projections of where it will be. There is one use of these funds that we are projecting in order to try to make sure that we come in under the threshold, the spending threshold. We would utilize some of the funds from our fund balance to help us assure that. So looking at the individual units a little closer, there is a 51-page booklet that has all the details right down to each line item. The Finance Committee has had that for some time and reviewed it. We've talked about it at several meetings. There's a lot of numbers in there, but it lets us track down every item, and I will assure you that every item has been reviewed by administrators with their staff, with the idea of, do we need this? If so, do we need to spend more money? And if so, why? And if not, that's good. And our services are basically level, and discretionary spending has been held in check quite nicely, I would say. So on the first page is actually the revenue, and I just want to point out two numbers on there, and Frank may want to add to this discussion, but about 8 lines down from the top, you see we're on the revenue page, in the second page, tuition, secondary Vermont public schools. That's a pretty big number, 3.35 million, and that is revenue from tuition. So it is a significant portion of our revenue. And that would be some Dover, Wilmington kids, and Vernon would be included in this.
It is now,
yes. It is now, right, because the way it looks like it's going to be is Vernon will be tuition to high school, to BUHS, at the Career Center. So that's one of the big numbers, but the real big number is about 20 lines down, called State General Support Grant, and that's 16.86 million, and that's projected to be up as was the tuition, by the way. in this case, 5.7%. That's the number that the state provides us for support after we figure out all our other revenues and what our expenditures are going to be. And then that generates the tax rate eventually, because we have to make it all add up. Those are the two biggest numbers on the revenue picture. If you look at the total revenue down towards the bottom, it would be up about $1 million, projected to be up about $1 million from last year. And then you look at the next line below that, it says reserve funds to reduce taxes. That's where it would be, we would put in 545,000, and that number is still current, right?
It is, yeah.
And so that's the revenue. Is there any extra comments you'd like to make about the revenue side?
No, I think you've highlighted the key points.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Woodward, can I ask you a question about the revenue side? Or do you want to wait till the end?
I'm fine. If you want to ask a question, we'll try to answer it.
Looking here at the fund balance that you're using, $545,000. In this current year's budget, there is $915,000. So when you look over to the right of that number, that means that the taxpayers in the district are going to have to make up $370,000. And you are sitting on a reserve of, what is it, 1.4 million? What's the number, Frank?
Yeah, on the first page, what Mr. Woodworth had reviewed, you see at the bottom of that first page, he just went over those figures that show the capital reserve projected to be $726,000 and the general fund reserve, which is what you're referring to, projected to be $2,331,000.
And so I guess I'm asking you, given what's going to happen moving forward, that you didn't at least use the $915,000 that's in this current year's budget, rather than the taxpayers make up that delta and you're sitting on this big pot of cash.
So maybe if you'd like, I'll respond to that. Yeah, so the next page, the third page of the handout, speaks to the projected tax rate, which is, I think, what you're ultimately getting at. In line 26, you see there in the middle of the page on the far right, based on what we have now and knowing that this is a temporary structure in that the state board has said that Brattleboro Union will be merged into a unified union district. Setting that aside, if we were to proceed in the traditional format, you see line 26 is projecting a tax rate of $1.72, and our current tax rate's $1.71. So this relates to what Mr. Woodworth was saying, where we're trying to come in at a level impact to our taxpayers, and that's part of the rationale for how much of the surplus to apply against taxes. It's intended to keep taxes pretty stable.
But if we applied the same number that we use this year, the number would go down, correct?
That's right.
That's correct. So
Yep.
that's what I'm asking you, why we didn't do that to reduce the burden on the taxpayers rather than keep it at a level form. Given, if my understanding is correct, as the district moves forward with the unified district, this pot of surplus money is going to go into one big pot of money to be used by the whole district next year.
That's correct, yeah. All fund balance, general fund balance will be part of the unified district, excluding Vernon.
So how could this, where is the opportunity for this number to get changed? Is that right here, right now?
It really is not particularly relevant. This is for illustration purposes under the legacy structures that we've existed under for more than 50 years. But as you know, State Board of Ed is, the state plan has been announced, and the plan is for this union to be merged, and the state law basically says that an elected board to the new entity will make these decisions. So this is more for illustration. It's not a proposal that would go to our traditional February high school meeting for a vote. So this is really for illustration, but it doesn't have a binding effect.
So I guess the follow-up question is that when that meeting does take place, whether that is in April or late March, at that point, will the body have an opportunity to use fund balance in that total pot to reduce this
Absolutely.
amount?
Yeah.
And then the only other, the other question that I did have is that when I look at, on the first page, you're talking about a 2.6% increase, $630,000. When you started off the budget, when you look at that debt service number, you're $156,000, almost $157,000. That doesn't come for a reduction for us, but you just use that. And so the reality is, without that debt service, this budget is up almost $800,000. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. Unfortunately, we'll continue to see the declining interest because the bond comes due to fiscal year '24, and this is a projection for fiscal year '20, so it's not too far out that the bond will, the principal amount, $1.6 million, will be removed from the budget. That goes back to the point that Mr. Woodworth made about, again, the reserve fund, and we know that bond is paying for a useful life that's being consumed, and 20 years after the bond, there will be many major systems that need to be replaced, so we're anticipating and planning for those replacements, again, to try to keep a stable spending pattern.
Thank you.
Particularly as it relates to the capital budget, we do look out more than 5 years, 6 or 7 years, at which time we will be past the end of the bond. But you know, we're keeping our reserve for capital with the idea that until then we still have to do some things. Even though we're still paying interest on the bond, we need money in the capital fund. And I guess interpretation of a pile of money can be different to different people, but we feel that what both the general fund and the capital fund reserves would be financially responsible for what we think we should have.
I guess my follow-up question to that, with the new structure, aren't all funds lumped together? So even though you have money in separate capital funds, don't they get lumped together, Frank?
So the statutes provide for everything lumped in to one district. However, the State Board of Ed Articles of Agreement added a sentence to that, which essentially says that restricted reserves will be maintained into the future based on the restrictions that designated those funds. So that does mean that this site, this Brattleboro Union campus, would retain that $726,000 reserve for improvements to this facility, just as the Brattleboro town has a smaller reserve for their site, and so does Putney, and so does Guilford.
Quick question, Frank. So following up to that, on a new merged board, is there going to be one capital plan, or are there going to be 4 different capital plans?
Oh, I would expect one capital plan, but it will be specific to each site, like it is now. We have capital plans for each district. The district goes away, but the sites are certainly very visible and identifiable, and the capital plan will identify the sites.
But it will have to be reformulated, won't it? I mean, you're not the new board is gonna have to set this up and approve it all, and so there could be changes to that, correct?
Oh, yeah, there could be changes, but the Articles of Agreement indicate that those initial reserves, eventually they'll all be spent, and you're right, there will be a completely different, funding mechanism for those, but initially, the reserves that are established for the projects that have been identified are going to be
So,
carried.
like, how far out those plans?
Generally, they're out till 2022, 23.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Sure.
This is to Frank. This is Ian Keel, BCTV camera. Can I just ask for clarification on that? In the merged district, is that the right terminology?
Sure.
You would have a sort of a unified capital plan, but would you still, there's the potential for restricted funds for each facility?
That's my understanding right
Okay.
now, yep.
Thank you.
Well, I think just to be clear too, to maybe Brattleboro Town's a better example of this than us because we're one campus. But the Brattleboro Town, as you said, has some reserve funds, but they have 3 different schools. And so some of those reserve funds may be targeted just towards Green Street or Academy. And in the new system, those reserve funds for capital improvements would go and they would still be reserved for Green Street or Academy or Oak Grove. And it can only be spent on capital improvements for that facility. Just like the capital reserve that we have here would stay for this campus until, as Frank said, until it's gone. And then the new board would have to structure capital reserves in a different way.
As would, in terms of being designated for us, our restricted endowment funds that we have, those all remain with an individual unit.
That's right, yep.
In some cases, those are bequests that are designated certainly for a particular unit. I think of the Eames number, scholarship is one of those. Since we're talking about tax rates and so forth, before we look at the individual schools, maybe would you want to make any more comments on the prior three-year comparison and how it relates to the tax rates?
Sure, just,
Basic, but
maybe very briefly.
the yield and all those
Okay.
fancy terms.
Yeah, so the page 3 is a document that's developed by the Agency of Education as part of a legislative directive that shares his proposed information as well as a context of the historical financial implications of budgets over time. So it's a 3 prior year, and it's prior to the proposed budget. So what you see at the very top of the page are funding statistics that are established by ultimately the legislature. So I'm looking at the numbers 10,220 and 10,666. They're referred to as the property dollar equivalent yield. That's the denominator in the funding formula that sets our tax rate. So it's a very important number. These numbers originate from the tax commissioner's recommendation to the legislature. Typically, school boards, if you're interested, you can find that letter. It's I believe it's on the tax commissioner's website, and that is an assessment of economic conditions in the state of Vermont and what is perceived to be a responsible way to fund public education. So the good news is that number has gone up this year from 10,220 to 10,666, and that essentially reduces the tax burden. And to illustrate that, if we spent $10,220 per student, you divide that by, as I said, that denominator, and our tax rate would be $1. And every district in the state goes through that same process. So 10,220 divided by 10,220 is 1. But you can see if we spend in a successive year this 10,666, but we were still comparing ourselves to the prior year's 10,220. Just do the math in your head. We won't get too precise, but you can see that 10,666 is bigger than 10,220, and therefore the tax rate goes up. It's more than 1.0, right? It's 1.04. So the point is that there's how the funding formula can assist the state public education systems and school boards as you plan to staff and to provide services for our students. So right off the bat, unlike in prior years, you may recall last year this time the state was saying, hey, we got a $70 million deficit. We're going to have to lower that number so that the local tax rate appropriated more money than it did the prior year. But this is the opposite. It's a favorable indicator. It's subject to change. It's set by the legislature. Last year they didn't set it until July, so these are estimates. But taking that into account, just a couple other comments. That the line 1 on the far left, I've got a bunch of numbers just and then into the right of, you can see 1, 2, and so on. Line 1 there, that's the budget proposed that Mr. Woodworth has just reviewed with you, $25,221,000. And essentially this school tax rate is set by board approved budget, subtract the revenue that again Mr. Woodworth reviewed, $7,542,000. That's primarily the tuition revenue that you saw, and then some of these other categorical grants. Comes down to a net number of 25 million minus 7 is the 17 million. We divide that by our equalized student count, and we get our cost per student of 18,372. These are all again projections. We divide that 18,372 by that number that I started with, 10,666, and that's our projected tax rate of $1.72 down there on line 26. As I say, this will get integrated into a single district. It'll probably be a number closer to 50 million, and it will be 2,000 kids plus. And it will be the same formula, and it will derive a tax rate. But that is yet to be determined based on the organization meeting that will occur sometime later this year. I think Lyle's going to clarify that a little bit later. And then an elected board to the merged district will consider the budgets just as we are doing tonight in the aggregate. We'll take that aggregate budget divided by our 2,220 equalized students, and we'll have a cost per student, and we'll have a projected tax rate, and then it will be up to the electorate to decide if they wish to approve it or not. So that's a little bit of an overview of the tax estimate.
Just add a couple of comments to that. The number of equalized pupils, which we always get in the 11th hour, this year came down as a lump for all the units considered for the merge. And so that required some work to sort out what number we were going to use for the high school. And Frank used some historical numbers, and I think that page is in your package too. That would be the next page. Page 4. To come up with what number were we going to use for equalized pupils. That's what those, and it was the November 2018 total that you used, right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And that's there's no page number on it, but the one with the horizontal, all the numbers in the towns. The first sector is total for November 2018, and those were the numbers that Frank used to come up with the equalized pupils. Whereas in the past, it would have been we would have gotten our number that was just for us. Well, thank you.
Is Vernon's numbers in there though, isn't it? In this one that you used?
This is for what's considered the, still the supervisory union, so all.
So they can count towards that when calculating the
So,
rate?
they're not in the Brattleboro union number, they are in their own district number.
But to calculate a per pupil, the line 24,
Mhm.
they are in that, correct?
Indirectly.
The way that you use that lump sum of students, the 25,
So do you see line 12 on the tax page? 960? So that does not include Vernon students. In the new format, that will not include Vernon students, and it doesn't in this format either. But I say indirectly it includes them because then go up to line 9. You see the 7,000,005. Well, about 2 million of that is Vernon tuition. So it's taking 25 million minus those revenues, gets a net number, then divides by just the resident students, excluding Vernon, Dover, Wardsboro, Marlboro. So
no students and no money, indirectly.
yeah. So the way that, for you to understand it, I think is if you were at the Vernon meeting, which is actually tonight as well, they're having the same conversation, but they have 160 kids at their elementary school. They have about 140 kids, mostly here, but they're counting not 160 students in their school. This same tax page, they're counting 340 kids because they're counting their K-6 plus the amount of kids they're paying for, in this case, mostly to BUHS. So every district counts their own resident kids. They compare that to their net cost per student, and in our case, our net cost per student is largely offset by Vernon tuition students. So we don't have the count in here, and we've reduced our cost by the revenue they send us.
Thank you.
So is the WISU budget going to go away next year? Is it going to be incorporated into the unified budget?
Initially, it appeared that it was, but there does not seem to be a timeline for the dissolution of the supervisory union at this point. So what we know as of today is the Secretary of Education has indicated the supervisory union will exist to facilitate the budget planning process and the administration of all the services a supervisory union provides for this region, which includes Vernon. So there will be what we know now is there will be a Vernon School District, there will be a Wyndham Southeast Unified Union District, and there will be a supervisory union.
So the way to get rid of, since Vernon did want to secede from us, and they were successful, we still have the elementary school as part of the supervisory union.
Yeah.
And if the unified board made a request to the State Board of Education to say, we no longer want Vernon Town School to be a part of this district, then we would be able to eliminate the WISU budget, and it could be a part of the unified budget. Is that correct?
Well, it's definitely the discretion of the State Board of Ed.
This is correct.
It's not the local district, but if the
But
state
the board could request that.
Yeah, if the state board made that determination, that is what would happen, yes.
And then Vernon would have to pay for all the they could contract with us, couldn't it?
Well, the state has said that they couldn't contract with a entity that is organized from a constitutional fairness point of view differently. So they have choice, and we don't have choice outside of our region. We certainly have choice inside our region. So they would have to affiliate with a district and a supervisory union like Wyndham Central, who has a Dover and a Wardsboro. They are identical structures where they have a K through 6 operating school where the kids attend that local elementary school, and then they have 7 through 12 choice. That's exactly what Vernon has. If they affiliated with Wyndham Central, then we could eliminate the supervisory union, and Vernon would have those supports from a different central office.
Complicated.
Mr.
Let's-
Chair, could I ask another question?
Sure.
This BCTV cameraman, I guess this is to Frank. By school choice within the unified district, does that mean that if a parent of a student who had a student, let's say at an elementary school in Brattleboro, wished to send that student to a Dummerston school, they would have that sort of choice?
So according to the Articles of Agreement, all grade levels are supposed to stay as they are currently aligned, and parents could make that request. They would have to make that request through the superintendent, and then the decision would be made based on student numbers, transportation costs. There would be a lot of different factors. At this time, we would not expect to hire a new teacher because we added so many students to a specific grade level.
And then, just to follow, that decision would be made by the SU and not the unified district?
That
No.
would be made by the unified district.
Okay. Thank you.
Sean?
I remember, Frank, during this whole process, you said that in the end, all the towns will have the same educational tax rate. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
So it hasn't been like that historically.
That's right.
So could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So as we were saying, each district, Vernon tonight, Dummerston tomorrow night, Guilford Thursday night, I'll have the same conversation about their individual budget proposal, their revenue assumptions, and then their, what used to be a separate student count. And that would derive a separate tax rate in each those towns. That tax rate is forwarded to the tax department. It goes back to the select board in that town, and then it's assessed based on the grand list in each town. So that was part of the problem, where if you're trying to plan regionally, say through a supervisory union, but you have differing impact from town to town in terms of what an investment means, like Guilford went through a investment in pre-K, but at the same time, another district may have just hit the penalty and didn't have room for that investment in their town. So maybe that wouldn't be a great year to propose a new investment. So my point is that it would be hard to plan regionally when the incentives differ from board to board to board based on those tax rate calculations. That is removed with this merged system in the governance structure, in that at this point what we know is the Dummerston proposal, the Guilford proposal, the Putney proposal, the Brattleboro town proposal, and this proposal, Brattleboro Union High School, will be merged into one single budget, and 2,220 students will be divided into that, and it will be one tax rate with no competition between, is this good for Dummerston or bad for Guilford, or indifferent in Putney. Those dynamics are gone, in that the one tax rate goes to each town equally, and then it is adjusted by each town's grand list, of course, depending on the last time they were
And
appraised.
CLA too.
That's the CLA, yeah, common level of appraisal.
Can we move on just to take a couple of minutes to look at the individual units, and 'cause I would like to communicate what some changes that have happened there. And we start with now the next pages are listed page 1 through 5, so a little easier to follow. Starting with the middle school, and aside from
You're working off a different packet, Bob, just.
Oh, yeah, this is, we started from 1 and then went to 10, so,
Oh,
yeah, so you're good, you're on page 5 now.
okay,
You're
well,
on like that.
I'm on page, no, so I've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, okay, well, in any case, then, on the middle school, we'll start, pretty much discretionary expenses held level. Is, under regular programs, property and equipment, there is an increase there, and it is time, at this point, to replace Chromebooks for one team, I believe, Keith?
That'd be for, if you look back, FY18, we purchased enough for a whole grade, and then we were able to get by for a couple of years without having to replace as many, and then we got to go back up to a whole grade. There's a whole grade level worth of Chromebooks ready to be
Not just a
replaced.
team, okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing, while you're on the floor, up at top, under salaries and benefits, there's an increase there. We have budgeted 1.0 full-time equivalent for academic support. Would you want to just give us a brief
Sure.
synopsis of what the reasons for that?
So we've run 3 academic support teachers for a while, and there's some grant funding available through the federal grant to fund a separate position. So we added that position in, so it looks like an increase in our spending because it is, but then we have a revenue offset with the federal grant. So take advantage of that federal funding. Fourth academic support teacher, which is greatly needed when you look at the student need.
How long does the grant funding last? Is it 1 year, 2
Year
years?
to year.
So,
It's Title I funding, which is a federal grant, so year to year, subject to government approval.
It has been very stable though.
Yep. And so some of those positions, a couple of those are locally funded, and then I think 2 are federally funded and 2 are local budget, Frank?
Right.
Yeah.
always a concern when the funding dries up, it shifts over to the general fund budget.
Yeah.
It's never a reduction in staff.
Well, it's never guaranteed, but the, like Mr. Rucker said, I think it's been many years that they've been able to fund the Title I grant.
We are, I might mention in terms of student census, our projection, and this is again not equalized pupils, but our projection for BAMS is to, the student count will go from about present of 284 to 314, so there will be a, we're not on the down anymore, we're on the up in terms of our student population. The other item that you see that is an increase is, besides the salaries that are negotiated in, is health insurance adds a little bit to it. But the primary number that supports the 5.6% is the, and again is offset by revenue, is that one person full-time equivalent. I think it's pretty much it for staff.
Yeah.
Changes there. Moving over to the high school, no new programs there. Our projected raw student count goes from about 809. So we have approximately now to projected at 842. This is based on the population in the various lower grades in the surrounding towns that we expect we will have, how many people, kids from Vernon, kids from outlying towns. We have an addition there in the budget. If you look in the, down in the second category, and again, I'm on page 6, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look down about a third of the way, support, direct instruction, voc ed. No, wait a minute. No. Support services, students, salaries and benefits, up 62,000. And I believe that's where the full-time clinician comes in.
Right,
Because you
so-
just
Yeah.
speak to that briefly?
So we currently have one school-based clinician, and she has a caseload of about 47 students right now, and she has a waiting list. And so this year, we're actually in the middle of the hiring process now to hire a second school-based clinician to work in tandem with that person. That will allow them to do individual work with students as well as doing work with small groups of students. The nice thing about that is that will be revenue neutral because that's going to be using Medicaid money
Right.
to fund that. And so that person will also be able to bill their time with students as well. So.
The other staff change in the senior high is reestablishment of the Dean of Students position.
Right, and so we had 3 assistant principals, then we went to 2 assistant principals and a dean, and then for the past few years, we've had 2 assistant principals. In tandem with that, we've had a part-time family interventionist for several years, and that position went away a couple of years ago as well. So we are going to bring that back as a combined position. We're going to have a dean of students who's also going to be doing direct family support. That family support involves things like helping parents understand how to access community resources, also working with families on parenting skills, how to help track academic progress, and various social emotional needs that we're seeing in our community. So as our population evolves, we need to really think about trying some new ways to engage with students and to engage with parents, because what we've done for decades isn't working anymore.
My remembering the old dean of students was, that person was in charge of discipline?
Yes.
Is that going to be part of this job description?
It's
or-
going to be part of it. What we have to think about as we parse that out, and we actually had a conversation about this today, saying that person is in charge of all discipline is really a recipe to burn out a person. And so rather than say that person just does discipline, we are considering using that position to target a group of students and families, specifically to work with that group of student and family. You know, we have, as we looked at our discipline data, we've got about 47 students make up about 70% of our discipline. So we need to work with those families intensively.
What's the dropout rate at the high school?
We right now have lost 11 students this year. Some of those have been transfers to other schools, some transferred out of state. That's where we're at right now. So
Where does that fall percentage-wise?
I don't know the exact percentage, I just do with numbers.
Out of 800.
What was it last year?
We lost 34 students last year.
34?
Yep,
That's a scary number.
it is. That involves
As
transfers.
I look at the board here,
Yep.
that would be a huge concern of me, having lost 34 students. Thank you.
Yep.
So, most other areas in the high school remain the same, basically. Discretionary expenditures are held in check, and there was 2 position changes, and contract salaries and health insurance are the key contributors to a bit of an increase of $428,000 on a just under $8 million, well, it will be just over $8 million budget. Just going through the Career Center, that is a budget that has very minor increase of less than 1%. There have been some realignment of a couple of programs over there, partial reduction of staff in dance program, digital editing, to reflect the student demands and what we can offer. But all programs in total still intact, right? Just changing the percentage of the staff, full-time equivalent percentage of the staff.
That's correct, in
Yeah.
digital editing.
Yeah. And there was one under support services, where there is an increase there, and that's the, you did increase to a full-time for a career pathways person, is that correct?
The career, is that a?
For career pathways.
The grant of the outreach.
It's in the general instruction section of the budget. Yeah.
I just assumed that's where that was, because we,
Yeah.
Are you on page 3, Mr. Woodworth?
Yeah.
yes, on my, yeah, page 3 of
In
this
what
one.
line?
It's about halfway down under support services, student total, and then it's gets salaries and benefits are up $16,000. Benefits are actually down, but salaries are up $16,000. That was, I had noted that was a part-time, and that now was 1.0.
Yeah, the biggest increase in the support services is our special needs coordinator, which is very experienced compared to the one that resigned last year that we have.
Okay, so maybe
There's no major changes.
I might have, as career pathways, I might have picked up that term somewhere that it's not.
No, I think you're right. It's the we call it outreach career pathways. We did increase the budget on that from 40,000 to 56,000.
Yeah, that's the Perkins grant. Yeah.
Oh, it is, yes.
That we have.
Yes, it is the
Yeah,
Perkins
so it's
grant.
not a
Okay, so that's
No
grant
tax
funded,
there.
right.
Yep.
increase at the Perkins grant.
Well, again, some of these things are expense increases, but they are offset by
Yeah.
revenue.
And that grant is yearly, been going on since 1975, so.
Yeah, every year we have to fill out an application and do a lot of paperwork. And
A lot of paperwork.
We request a certain amount, and generally we're what we get is in the ballpark of what we request.
Yeah, we received a $34,000 increase this year that we had.
Yeah. So overall, the Career Center is pretty level. Then just quickly, I'll go through district-wide. District-wide has a few pretty good-sized numbers in it, and now we're on page 9 of my page 4. I always seem to get on different pages than everybody else. If you look at district-wide, the biggest, one of the biggest numbers is down, most of the way down the page, contract services, professional and technical, and that changed a little bit with respect to the supervisory union budget, because the supervisory union assessment is in there, and the supervisory union board just passed their budget and changed our assessment a little bit, right?
Right, and they asked the diversity position to be
yes.
allocated through the supervisory union, so that had an impact.
Yeah, that's up at the top, and that's part of the decrease in salary there as that moves over to the supervisory union. Like to talk briefly about operations and maintenance of plant. That's a big number at the top of the next page, and it is a $1 million number and up $72,000. What is included in that is the
It's
addition.
actually the bottom of everyone's page now.
Oh, yeah.
Just making sure we're all in the same place.
Well, I work off these notes that Frank provides me, and then, yeah, sometimes the pages,
Yeah, reformatted so it's a little more readable than the email version.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Ricky.
Yep.
So a day supervisor, and that Robert Clark is a real valuable asset to us, our director of maintenance. providing him with a day supervisor will allow him to work on larger projects, but also to provide guidance and assistance to some of the other units in the district. And I think that's how that's set up, basically, would be to allow that. And then in that section down a little ways is the debt service payments, which Frank alluded to, down $156,000, which that's helpful. Special education, that's still that's a huge number, 1.8. In this case, is it still preliminary until the AOE finalizes there?
So the spending side at the SU has been voted and finalized. The revenue side from the AOE is still to be developed. But I do think that we will be looking about at that amount for fiscal year 20.
Yeah. Okay, and then we get down to the bottom line, which ties into the summary page that we talked about before, $25,221,000. Just a quick comment, food service shows an increase there. That's as a result of our universal lunch program where everybody gets lunch.
And breakfast.
And breakfast. Yeah. Yes, Fonz.
Question, the SU assessment, does that appear as a single line item, or is that in various places?
It is in 3 places. There's a special education assessment, and then Mr. Woodworth referred to the administrative one on page 9, where it's within the contracted services and professional to technical. And what that represents is Brattleboro Union High School is about 32% of the region from an enrollment point of view. So they get a 32% share of the district. The third assessment is the transportation, and that one is on, I think it's going to be on page 10, back page, student transportation. See the second group of costs, and there it is. And it is, I think it's important to note that the administrative assessment is also for supportive instruction. It includes curriculum assessment, it includes a technology support. That's where the diversity program is, part of supportive instruction, as well as the Asian Studies program.
And for the SU budget, you're saying that it was just approved and allocated to the different districts. Is that different from the SU budget that was approved like a month ago?
No, this board had their meeting where we had a first draft December 3rd, and then they met a couple of days after that and had their budget.
And so with the unified district, it'll just be apportioned to the unified district and to Vernon under the current alignment of the SU for 2020?
That's my understanding, yeah.
So, one of my big issues, as I stated around 6 o'clock with the district, the supervisory union budget, it's a almost a $20 million budget that gets little public scrutiny, if at all. In fact, I doubt if there was anybody from the public at that meeting. Was there, Frank?
There was.
There was. Was it you?
It was
when
me,
they adopted the budget?
Yeah.
There you go.
And the hearings up to the budget as well.
And so, I guess a question I have, when I went and asked Frank for his budget, the budget today, and received it. When I see administrative and instruction up $250,000, I hope that's not what we're paying the diversity coordinator. Can you tell me what else is going into that high number there for that increase?
Sure, yeah, the majority of the increase was the diversity program that
What are we
was
paying for that?
approved. The board voted specifically, the supervisory union board voted, I believe it was in a, it's either an October or November meeting, where they asked the finance committee to include $162,000 for the diversity coordinator program, and it's 2 positions, and that was approved by the supervisory union board. So the other increase was associated with adding a benefits coordinator in the business office, and that was approved as well. So
Don't
other
we
than
already
that,
have one there?
pardon?
Don't we have one in there already?
No, we've functioned with one human resource person to serve the 700 employees in the supervisory union, and that's just becoming undoable with all of the additional requirements around benefit administration, particularly associated with administering the HRA plan, and also the Affordable Care Act has a lot of data recording and measuring, reporting to the IRS that requires coordination with benefits administration. So those relatively new programs have required additional time.
Have we had any problems with the process that we're using now?
We've really struggled to be ahead of the deadlines, and folks are having to work outside of reasonable hours. So we've hit the targets, but it's really not a reasonable ratio of hours and services needed.
Okay,
And any other questions related to the budget?
it will come up later in the meeting for action by the board.
Yeah, I had a question about the offsetting revenue figures on page 3. Our total offsetting revenues are down about 300,000, it looks like, from the current year to the projections for fiscal year 2020. And I know we've heard about some of the grant funding and other ways of paying for new positions, so it makes me think that maybe offsetting revenues should be up a little bit, and instead they're down a little bit, and I'm wondering what the difference is there.
Sure. So I think Mr. DeGray has sort of pointed out the overarching explanation for that, and that is at the bottom where when we have use of reserve going from $915,000 to $545,000, that's a $370,000 reduction. But I do want to point out, as Mr. Perrin referred to, the Medicaid funding that essentially is funding the behavior interventionist.
Clinician.
I'm sorry, the clinician. You see right kind of in the middle of the page where you see a $90,000 increase, that you see that that is new revenue on that revenue page. And then Mr. Lyman referred to the Title I funding increase. You see that's just to above the Medicaid subgrant revenue. You see where we go from $202,000 to $230,000. So those are some significant revenue increases that are having an impact on.
But the reason it's lower is because of the use of fund balance.
Overall, the drop in the fund balance reduces the total. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? I guess it's directed to Frank. This is Ian Keel for BCTV. Is the board, or whether it's a district level or state level, is there been a guiding percentage or number that you've wanted to keep in this reserve, the operating reserve?
Not from the Agency of Education, no. Experience and working with auditors, and then understanding cash flow needs and the various tax collection dates, which dictate cash flow to the district, through the towns. A range between 5 and 10% is prudent. The state of Vermont has a requirement that the education fund will retain a 5% reserve. So there's maybe a precedent. I'm not sure, maybe Mr. DeGray knows, or Mr. Franz, I'm sorry, Reichsman, right? I'm sorry, I forgot your name for a moment. I don't know if the town of Brattleboro has a guideline. I think at one time it was 10%.
Well, it is 10%, but it's not a hard line. The board has the ability to go under the 10%. I was actually on the board when we adopted that figure. But as the budget has been growing exponentially over the years, although that 10% is the same 10%, because that budget is growing higher, that surplus number also grows with the budget number. And I don't believe here that, and I think I've asked this question, if you ever had a guideline for what you wanted to have in a surplus, but I think you're restricted on what you can use that surplus money for. And I'm wondering if that's still the same with the new act that we're going to be under, Act 46.
I don't think they changed the statute on boards adhering to use of fund balance. Brattleboro Union High School had a series of votes several years ago that established an education reserve, and it's on, you see that on page 1, that $2,306,000 was established, I think maybe as long ago as 2014, and the board has not had to utilize that. By using 915 in this fiscal year, theoretically, and then a proposed 545 in fiscal year 20, you can see we would come down to that number. Right now we're at 3,791,000. The 915 minus the 545, as you see there on page 1, brings us down to that original reserve that has been in existence for many years. But maybe getting back to Ian's question, so we are a little less than 10% with our projected fund balance.
And we don't, I don't believe we have a specific percentage number goal for capital. The way we've operated with that is, since it's been established, is looking ahead again on a capital plan for up to 8 years, and what do we see coming up, and some major ones, and making sure that we, whenever we can, put some aside for those major things. The first real big one will probably be is related to the HVAC system, and I don't have it right here where exactly what year it is, but there's a pretty good size one coming up in about 4 or 5 years. So the facility will be, 2004, 15 will be 20 years old by then. So some of those little bigger numbers will start popping up for what we need. We do a lot with roofs and floors and things like that as we go along, but main infrastructure, it's a $55 million campus, and so we need to keep hopefully putting aside some in capital, but I don't believe we ever had a percentage. Since I've been doing this, I don't think we've had a percentage goal per year. Did you?
I agree with that. When we look at the capital plan, it becomes pretty clear that you have to have money in a pot somewhere to take care of all these things that are coming up. And I think you always bring that up, in that we have to maintain the quality that it was done in the renovation. And so when we talk about our capital fund, you can see you're going to need that money for sure.
So I guess what I can't really wrap my head around is that you're sitting here with all this unrestricted money. Why didn't you choose to move it over to a restricted fund balance for capital moving forward, rather than this unrestricted money going into this unified district for everybody to use?
Well, at this point, as you see on that first page, that education reserve is a committed amount. It's committed to Brattleboro Union, so it is a reserve. It's not a typical reserve in that not every school district has that.
Emerson has one, correct?
Right.
I think of the conversation that we
Right.
had.
Right, but it is restricted. So if when a merger occurs, Brattleboro Union High School will have that until it's utilized.
Any other questions related to the budget as we stand so far? And as Bob pointed out earlier, a little bit later on in our agenda, we will, as a board, have to vote on approving this budget to move forward so that it can move forward however that looks like, whether that's to the taxpayers right away or if it goes to the unified board first and then goes to the taxpayers. So. All right. So everybody's good on that. I will end the public information session related to the budget then, and we'll move to our clerk's report and the approval of the minutes from our December 17th meeting.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Would you indulge me to change a battery?
Yes. Why don't we go ahead, 7:14, so why don't we adjourn, let's do a 6-minute adjournment. We'll come back at 7:20 and start with the clerk's report then. We're adjourned. All right, and we're back. It's 7:20. We're out of our break for battery and other things. It's now 7:20, and we move on to the clerk's report and the approval of the minutes of December 17th. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes of the meeting Monday, December 17th, 2018.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions?
Abstain.
Abstaining and abstaining. Okay, all right. Motion is approved and we approve the minutes. Do any board members have any communications that have come before them in relation to anything since the last meeting? See anything? Okay, so no communications. Nothing else under the clerk's report. And recognition of groups and or individual visitors. We do have some individual visitors here. And we start on my left, your right, and let us know who you are and why you're here.
Devin Rhodes, president of Team Tenny. I was here about 3 months ago. After we sent the board a letter with our proposal that was failed to be recognized, I came here and read it off myself, at which point it was shuffled aside, saying that the finance committee will discuss it. And since then, to public knowledge, there's only been one finance committee meeting, which can't be the case after what we just went through with this whole budgeting process. So it wasn't open to the public or anything. So from where we stand as a committee, we're waiting on word from the finance committee and what they have to say, since we haven't received any word since then. And so we're basically, just sitting on our hands because we can't gain funds from any businesses or investors to move forward, and we just want answers on our proposal.
Proposal to make some alterations over there, or?
Yeah, the proposal that I read off last time, where I acknowledge that we have 2 contractors within town willing to donate their time and labor, and with you saying that you're not willing to give any funds, that's understandable, but we made it clear that we would gain the funds ourselves, but which is at this point impossible due to the fact that we can't move forward because you guys won't give us any solid answers.
Well, I think our position had been that we were not at any point ready to move ahead with that type of a decision. We certainly didn't, we did not approve, and I would say that the plans as they were first presented as to what people wanted to do, the concrete and all that, we just felt it wasn't appropriate for that. We are working on a full plan for the whole campus, and for the last couple of months, we have been working pretty much entirely on the budget, and those meetings have been warned. Finance meetings have been warned, I believe, 100%. So it's still on the list, the to-do list, but we have not taken any action.
Right, and it doesn't make sense not moving it forward or anything, because we are just stalled at this point in time. Well, the last time I was here, the proposal for the football field was unanimously, approved, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars up front, as well as every 8, 10, 12 years. And that's all good and dandy, but the grandstands is just deteriorating, more rapidly each month, each year, and we're not allowed to do anything when we just want to move forward with it. And you say that you decline our proposal, but saying that it wasn't discussed in that regard because it's a athletic thing as a whole, when we have everything willing to go right now, we don't know why we can't go forward with it.
Okay. Well, we can talk about it at our next finance meeting, which I don't think we've scheduled yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. I will say that we have not approved any major expenditures for the football field at this point. We've identified some capital improvements down the line, but there's been no major investment improved.
Right, for them to move forward with their research or whatever you want to call it.
Right, which is
we
all
have
part of the
ours-
full
we have all
campus
ours
plan.
set up
Yeah.
in a row right now. We filed for, we have it historically preserved, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't mean much, because you guys can still tear it down if that's what you choose, but we are able to file for grants if need be, but we can't do anything as of this point because things are just stalled out.
You cannot come up with a fundraising plan and...
Well, we have a plan in place, but it's almost impossible to gain revenue from investors without having any solid dates or numbers, which I thought I made clear last time.
Can I ask a question? You're not asking for funding from the district,
Absolutely not.
but you actually are looking for approval from the board to move forward with your project. And so what you're in essence saying, that your funders aren't going to give you any money until the board approves the renovation by donation to the district.
Correct.
And one of the options for that particular slice of the campus is to be able to expand and create a proper soccer field and move the baseball field. Tenny Field is not the issue, it's just the grandstand. I should make that clear too, that is, nobody talking about doing away with Tenny Field. But moving the grandstand back, taking it down and moving the field back, I'm sorry, I misstated, would allow us a better alignment of fields and give us more options for the various sports that we have.
Okay.
That's one way.
That's
one way
talking
that-
demolition, and if this is just basic geometry, if you move home plate back as you're proposing, that widens the foul lines. Every 10 feet, 20 feet, you want to move it back, that just keeps widening the foul lines, which then puts the light poles in play, which puts the dugouts in play. There's hardly any space on the right field line as it is with gate. So then you're putting people walking in the field of play. There's not much room to work with as it is. in those terms. In terms of moving the whole field back, you're gonna have to readjust the lights, readjust the dugouts, all the above. So that's opening a whole can of worms that comes with the demolition.
Well, I don't know the details, and we have not discussed the details of how it's going to change foul lines and so forth. We're just maintaining that as one of the options for our campus plan, which the administration is working on, and we'll continue to follow it and do the best we can. But I don't think that, speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee, we can say at any point right now or soon that, yeah, let's go ahead and, you know.
But this is where we were last time as well.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at, is you kept saying, you know, we'll discuss it with the Finance Committee, we'll discuss it. And I'm here 3 months later and I'm at the same spot.
Well, I think what Bob's also saying is that we've asked the administration and others to start looking at the variety of options available, because that's one of the things we need to do, as far as, because we're looking not just at one field, one grandstand, one whatever, we're looking at the entirety of our athletic field spaces and what's available and whatever else. And I understand that you're frustrated by the process, but we don't want to see, one of the conversations that we had is we don't want to see you all be putting money and effort into something that a year down the road everything changes because a bigger plan was decided and done, so it's a matter of doing things in a more comprehensive and more strategic way related to all of our athletic spaces, because the one thing that we as a board, the Finance Committee, hear from the administration a lot is that we don't have enough field space, we don't have enough, there's timing issues, there's what we can do on certain fields, things like that. So we've asked them to help us come up with a better plan overall.
Right, and the turf football field was approved for, your research and whatnot going forward, so that would take care of the field hockey and soccer issue. And regardless of that, we have offered to make the soccer and field hockey fields VPA approved for playoffs by inserting sod within the infield, and that was declined. So it seems like every step of the way we're trying to come up with answers. We're trying to work with one another, and we just keep being declined, and it just keeps being shuffled along. We want 2019 to be the year that people are able to go and sit and enjoy a game in the Tenny grandstands. That's our goal, and it just keeps being shuffled along to next month, 3 months down the line, who knows how long.
Well, I would say that the Finance Committee will meet soon, and we would put that first on our agenda, and we'll come up with something in a way of a more definitive answer. And we will have perhaps some more input from administration if we schedule something within a couple of weeks or so.
Right now, we're in terms of campus field improvements, right now we're in the middle of the practice field expansion. And that's part of this process. The other piece of the process is the permitting process we're in the middle of for the maintenance garage. So while it appears that nothing's happening, there's a lot happening right now. And that planning is going ahead. We got approval from the board to take a look at the feasibility study for a turf field. Turf field would certainly change the dynamics and the pressures on all the other fields. But I think what we need to do is we need to be deliberate and we need to be thorough before we, as Ricky said, before we put a plan in place, we need to make sure it's the plan that we want. And that does take time.
Right. And our committee would never have been formed if demolition of the grandstands wasn't proposed.
And I want to be real clear, it was never proposed.
I have to stop you
Well,
there because
we wouldn't have organized ourselves if it wasn't.
nobody on the board, nobody in this administration has said that that's the plan. We're
Well,
looking,
that's where we started, was that being said, so we have to come up with our own alternative to try and fix this problem.
and the problem that the administration's trying to fix right now is ensuring that we have enough field space for all of our teams to play in a safe, quality environment.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is BCTV cameraman, Ian Keel. What would be the appropriate method for Team Kenny or any member of the public? Could they be involved in the discussions about planning for the facilities and the
Well,
field?
I mean, right now, all of those conversations have happened and will be happening within the finance committee, and those are all open public meetings, so people could come to those meetings to have those conversations.
Okay.
And members of Team Tenny have attended those conversations.
And, yeah, and they have attended those meetings. Yeah. But I just want to say again that the first time I ever heard any conversation in relation to demolition of the grandstands at Team Tenny is when I heard a radio ad by Team Tenny saying that we were going to do this.
Well,
That was the first time I ever heard any conversation about that at all, was on a radio ad. And I remember I got out of my car and I sent an email. I said, did I miss a meeting? Because that was not a discussion that I was ever part of.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and it was when it was a radio ad that said that we had decided to do that. So, I just,
Yeah, and that's funny, because within the Reformer article, it was thought to be a joke that the bulldozers weren't started up yet to demolish it, which is kind of a crude comment in our regard. Yeah.
Was being made to seem like we had the bulldozers fired up and were ready to go, and we had not made any decision, of such decision at that point, nor have we.
Right. And from our standpoint, that's kind of a crude joke.
well, I think we have it's on the top of the agenda now for the finance committee meeting for their next meeting. And that is a public meeting, and that'll be the next conversation related to this. Yes,
Ricky,
Mr.
can
DeGray.
you, one of the things, I do have a huge concern, not about so much the tennis field, but I have a huge concern about astroturfing and the huge expense. And if any of you do any homework, or you want to do some homework, actually you should go down into the planning office and talk to Brian Banyan about the potential for significant costs. It's not just astroturfing, but it's impervious surface and water mitigation. And, a while ago, we were talking about a dropout rate here and 34 students leaving the school, and you want to spend your money on AstroTurf. I think it would be quite embarrassing to say that we want to spend all this money on field space when there are fields, and maybe better coordination, and also working with the town, who's added a significant number of field space in the town, versus spending all this money on field space and not addressing the issue of the dropout rate that you have here. So if someone can tell me when the administration, Steve, when you're going to be discussing this, I would definitely like to be in on these conversations.
Sure, I mean, we've started the discussions already, and that's part of the reason why the board approved a feasibility study, to take a look at those things. What are the pros, what are the cons, what are the costs? Our facilities manager and our athletic director are visiting other facilities to find out about their experience using artificial surfaces, what they mean, what are the benefits, what are the costs down the road, and that's still in process right now. In terms of field space, we do have a need for field space. We have a very generous lease from the folks up at Vayback, and that real estate could go on the market at any time, could be sold at any time. If that were to happen, we would certainly suffer quickly, because we do a lot of sub-varsity and varsity practices up there. The VPA has approved ultimate frisbee as a varsity sport. We have a lot of interest from the students. It's a club sport now. There's interest in making that a varsity sport. That's another strong use of field space. And so as we're looking at that, our fields are scheduled from when school gets out at 3:30 all the way to dusk. One of the things that we look at and we consider when we look at an artificial surface is that in the fall, because the field can't be used that much because it gets damaged, we don't use that field 4 days a week. And so that's a huge waste of time. Also, we have to look at it not just in terms of the space, we have to look at it temporally as well. We can stack practices one after the other, and we can use that field into the evening because it's lit. So those are ways that we would expand our practice times. So that's kind of the process we followed to get to this point right now.
Can I add something?
Sure.
I was actually here at this meeting a few months ago when Mr. Clark and Sawyer presented the idea. And just to mention about the water part of it, the track was resurfaced last year, and Mr. Clark, in anticipation for this project, put in a drainage system as if we were going to implement a turf field, which was a really smart move. It could save us a lot of money by doing that. I also went to the meeting with Sawyer and Mr. Clark. I expressed my interest with Sawyer, and he was like, "Yeah, come to the meeting." And we walked around the field. It's the same company that did Amherst College's field as well as Burton. And just about the amount of time put on our grass and our natural fields the fields are overworked. As a varsity soccer player in the fall, we're warming up on the sidelines, and there's 2 teams already on Sawyer Field playing. And then as soon as one team gets off, we're on, and we get half the field, and the other half is another team. And then JV will be done, and we'll finally get the full field for the last half hour. And you can see by the end of the season, the fields are deteriorating. And by putting this turf field in, it would become a huge sort of community thing. Every night we'd be having games for every sport. There'd be lines for lacrosse, field hockey, soccer, football. I don't know, it'd become this hub instead of all these different fields that we're trying to use. And it would open up space for ultimate frisbee and other things that the school wants to put on. So just putting that out there.
If I could just.
Yeah, Russ.
Yeah, just sort of to put this into context for both Tenny Field and talking about the other fields and talking about the dropout rate and those sorts of things, is that, and maybe it's because I'm taught economics for so long, but there are a lot of demands for resources, both physical resources and financial resources. And but there are trade-offs and there are connections. So if we just listened, and there have been moments in the history of this board where we focus on sports, on athletics, and if we did just what people wanted for athletics, to get fields, to preserve the grandstands, to do all these sorts of things, then the funds would go there, and either we'd have to raise taxes or cut back on other things. If we focus just on buildings and grounds, different sorts of things that we focus. And a lot of these things are also interconnected. I mean, you're talking about dropout rates and as if it has nothing to do with athletics or extracurriculars or other sorts of things. It's all complicated. It's all connected. And what the board does, in my view, is sort of a bigger perspective in trying to balance all these things. And we can't. And if there's mergers, it's going to be even a bigger view that a board would have to look at. But we rely on the administration to make specific recommendations about how we put these things in. Do we need more, curricular support? Do we need more teachers? Do we need more sports fields? How do we do all these things? We want more of all of this, but we just can't afford all that. And so we rely on that, and a lot of the work and a lot of the specifics you're talking about take place in committees to go into that, and a lot of the specific questions that have been discussed is where that takes place. And I'm not saying, oh, you should have gone to those committee meetings. If you went to all the committee meetings, you'd have no time to do anything else. There's scarcity of time as well. So we're trying to do the best we can, and we count on people. And I don't know how many of these budget review meetings I've been to where nobody from the public shows up. And I think to me, that's always very disappointing, because we need to hear what the specific needs are. And if it wasn't Team Tenny, it wasn't for you, it wasn't for others, we maybe would be missing some things. So it's important to hear these things. But it's also important to remember that we've got to balance everything. And we rely on advice from our administrators to do that. So it's not to minimize anything that anybody has said, but it's just that we can't do everything for everybody and still keep tax rates down. What do we do? And that's our job. And so I for one appreciate hearing all of it, but then ultimately the decision has to be made. How do we balance all that?
So I just want to respond briefly. Thank
Sure.
you for that.
Yeah.
I did serve on this body.
Oh, I know you have.
And I have served on the select board.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm well versed that priorities in terms of where our funding goes and needs are always higher than the funds available. So I appreciate what you're saying, but please understand that I've been here and I've served my community well in 2 different capacities. And you're right, going to all these meetings that are warned, coming here tonight asking questions about is there any opportunity to adjust a fund balance line. And I believe that can still happen with this body here, and I hope that it does. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I do understand what you're saying, but always remember that I've been here, I have served in this institution, on this board, and I've also been a school board member, a select board member.
No,
So
you do a lot of other things that
that's
there's no board for.
that's totally irrelevant.
Oh, no, but I apologize if you thought that it was at all personal at all. I mean, I do appreciate all those things, and I think that it's really important, and you individually do serve a very important role in bringing these things to light. But it's just sort of a general reminder, in part to people who are watching, that everyone has a point of view and a valid point of view, and has things that are important. And you've seen it from both sides, that somehow the balances have to take place, and that's what we try to do. So thank you.
So going back to our agenda and recognition of groups and individual visitors, I know Mr. Rhodes was here, and we've had a conversation. And Mr. Reichman and Mr. DeGray, you're both here related to the budget review and that process. Is there anything else that you wanted to?
I don't know if you're going to discuss your meeting on Wednesday at all.
We are going to get to that. Yeah.
I am here for that also.
Okay, great.
I'd just like to say that I'm here from the Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee, just so people know that's my orientation.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move into consent agenda. Is there a motion to enter consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so let's start with finance, building, and transportation.
We have not met since the last board meeting.
But we have some action later on related to the budget process. Yeah. WSCSU Finance Committee.
We have not met.
Planning and Policy.
Has not met.
Teacher Curriculum.
Has not met.
BAMS Committee.
Has not met.
WRCC.
Has not met.
All right. Which with the holidays, not unreasonable. All right, moving on to administrative reports. Oh, sorry, is there a motion to accept a consent agenda? We have to do that.
So moved.
Moved, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's go with administrative reports. And why don't we start with student council? Thank you guys for coming in.
I'm Lucy Clark, so I'm a member of student council, I'm a sophomore.
I'm Gus Williams. I'm a junior member of student council. We kind of just came to present a few things that we're working on. Recently, we finished up with Project Feed the Thousands. We raised a little over $1,500 and 600 food items. This will go to Project Feed, which will help Vermont Food Bank, Putney Food Shelf, Drop-In Center. So that was a big project for us the past couple of months, and we had the kickoff sort of event in the auditorium where members of WTSA and Project Feed came in and spoke to the student body. We had bins in the entrance and at the library, and that's how we collected our food, and then we counted it up every Wednesday, part of student council, and tallied our collections. This coming February and into March, we will be serving at the overflow shelter, doing dinners. We have 3 or 4 scheduled evenings where 4 to 5 student council members will be helping out at that and putting on a dinner there, so that's pretty exciting. And do we have anything else to mention? Long Block Ace. We're trying to move forward with that. We are scheduled to be in a staff meeting in February to continue to talk with that. We've had a meeting with Gina Honorato, and she does the school scheduling, so she was just asking us about what our progress was, and so I think we're kind of our next plan is to be at the staff meeting in February, potentially look at putting the system in after February break, and kind of going from that. The student body across the board was in favor of it, so that's good, and we try to speak and present what the student body wants. So we've been bringing that to staff meetings and to administration. So just progressing from there, I guess. We have no definitive date on when we're going to implement the schedule, but that's the update. Anything else?
Excellent, thank you very much.
Sure.
In Project Feed, didn't you have a class competition?
Yes, we did.
Did you want to give a shout out to the winners?
I think it was a freshman class, and I think it was freshman last year too. So I don't. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Go freshmen. So, okay, great. Thanks. All right, BAMS. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, a few things I briefed you on before the holiday break, but we wrapped up some wonderful kind of holiday things. Project Feeds, we had good participation from the middle school. I think we had over 300 pounds of food. Interestingly measured it different ways, but filled up several grocery carts with donations, and that was led by the student leadership group. The student leadership did a lot of work in the last, in December. They also kind of helped organize a pep rally, and staff members contributed to a volleyball tournament we had on the last day. We had a great fun with kind of a contest with Project Feeds where it was kind of like kids could donate to either one teacher's cart or the other teacher's cart, and it was a little competition to who had the most stuff in the cart. And so they ate elf spaghetti, which was spaghetti and then a bunch of sweets on top, and the kids had a blast watching those 2 staff members eat it up, and they were great sports, and it was a lot of fun. And you go deaf going in the gym during that elf spaghetti pep rally volleyball tournament. It was a great day. We also had a door decorating contest where the kids decorated doors based on our social contract from our school and kind of put a holiday twist to it. So great fun leading up to the break. Today, student leadership went up to Landmark College and had a nice day. I was up there for a little bit, and student leadership teams from all over the SU participated, and Landmark's been great in hosting us the last few years, and students had various components that they moved around and learned about different topics, and it was hosted by the high school dimensions students, kind of led the groups. We'll see, upcoming event, we have the Career Center Circus Arts program is going to perform for our students January 11th. We have a couple of small short assemblies where we get to be entertained by that. Looking forward to that, and that's the first time that's ever happened. So, a couple of staffing updates. Special Ed has hired Michelle Nelson to be a full-time special ed teacher at BAMS. We're pretty excited to have Michelle. There was a vacant position that hadn't been filled until just now. And then we have a woman named Hadley Garcia in as a long-term sub starting tomorrow in English for Rebecca Twaits. And so a couple of new staff members. And we believe I told you last time I hired well, yeah. So I have one resignation that I wanted to announce. Well, it's not news to you, but a year and a half ago, probably a year ago, Joe Powers and Ann Kaplikalair proposed a 50-50 split. Joe is retiring, and he'll be retiring at the semester change. So he's asked for you to accept his letter of resignation effective January 25th as a social studies teacher on Team Taurus. So Ann Kaplikalair will be coming back after about a year of leave to fill in for the rest of the year and go back to full-time. So I'd ask that you accept the resignation of Joe Powers.
Is there a motion? So moved.
Second.
All right. Yeah. Joe's been a long term. He's been here a long time.
7 years, I think.
Are you thinking Joe Rivers?
I was thinking Joe Rivers. I'm
That's
sorry.
why I was a little.
I got blanked too. Yeah, but
Fine teacher, he'll be missed.
yeah, yeah, very missed. Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Anything else? All right, high school.
Okay, so a few things going on at the high school. We're rapidly approaching the end of this first semester. We'll have final exams on the 24th and 25th. The schedule is still pending, but I would anticipate that we do block 1 and block 2 finals on the 24th and block 3 and 4 on the 25th. We'll share that out as soon as it's completed. On January 11th, after you finish seeing Circus Arts, you could certainly come over to the high school auditorium and see our local Poetry Out Loud competition. It's our yearly oratorical competition, and our students do a great job. They are assigned a poem, they memorize the poem, and they understand the nuances of that poem. They present it, and then we have the winner represents BUHS at the state competition later on in the spring. It's a stunning event to listen to some students who are otherwise very quiet and very reserved get up and with emotion and feeling do a great job of reciting usually a significantly long piece of poetry. Tuesday the 15th at 7 o'clock here at BUHS, the music department is presenting an evening of a cappella, and all of our student groups will be represented. They'll be also joined by some independent groups. The BUHS groups will be joined by our other student-led groups, Renegades, Spiralia, the Venerable Shoulder Narrows, and Expressivo. And if you get the chance to see that, it's a wonderful event. We have a long history of quality a cappella here at BUHS, and if you get the chance to see it, it's always great. Along those same lines, this Thursday, the band chamber ensemble concert will be at the Brattleboro Music Center Auditorium this Thursday at 7 o'clock. Steve Rice has done a great job getting them ready, and I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous show. On the 20th, we did our first coffee with a principal, and we had about 15 parents show up at 8 o'clock on that morning, and we talked for about an hour. A wide range of topics, everything from school climate to equity to ways that the school can better improve communication with families and different venues we can use for communication. They asked that we do this as a regular event, which I think is a great idea. The next event will probably focus on our math and science departments. They've asked for specific topics to be generated along the way, and we'll take suggestions as we move through. We welcome our 8th graders, which will be the class of 2023. We welcome their parents on February 7th. That's coming up quickly. We generally have a good turnout for 8th grade parent night, and we do a quick orientation. And then a few years ago, we changed the format. So rather than department heads doing tours, we have department heads in the library, and interested parents can go speak to specific department heads. Finally, in our own staffing news, we have retained the services of BUHS alumni and science assistant Jacob Smith to take over for Ben Lord next semester. Ben, as you recall, was approved for a semester leave. He'll be off next semester, and Jacob is excited to come in and try his hand at teaching biology. So we'll be looking for a short-term fill of Jacob's position, but we welcome Jacob, and he certainly did a great job at his interview, and we're excited to have him join us for the next semester. I think that's it. Any questions?
Is that FATE seminar going on tomorrow night? Is that
Yes, counseling, yep,
Yep.
yep, thank you. At 6:30?
6:30 in the all-purpose room?
No, I believe it's in the counseling conference room, but if it's not, it's in the multipurpose room. It's one of those two venues.
Yep.
All right, Career Center.
Sure. A couple of things. Before the holiday break, our circus and dance students that we've been talking about a little bit, circus art students, performed scenes from the Nutcracker to some of our elementary school students. That went over very well. They performed at Oak Grove, Green Street Academy, and Putney, I believe. I think Lyle attended Green Street, didn't you? And I attended the Academy performance there. And it was very well received by students, parents, and staff, and especially the little kiddos when they see their eyes light up when they see the dancers and the circus arts students perform. And that circus arts performance at BAMS is during the day for the students, but they also have a performance that's open at 7 o'clock in the evening. So if you're not at the poetry competition, you should be at the BAMS multipurpose room for the circus arts performance at 7 o'clock. And also, I'd like to recognize Mary Beth Cornell, our FBLA advisor. She has been named FBLA Advisor of the Year for the state of Vermont. So nominated by the students and or selected for this past school year, the 2017-2018 school year. So I'd like to recognize Mary Beth. And also, I have one resignation to announce that I just had a letter handed to me Friday afternoon that informed the board that one of our firefighting instructors, Dave Emery, has submitted his resignation effective at the end of this semester. Dave's a full-time firefighter with the town of Brattleboro and has worked with us for the past 16 years. He's one of the co-coordinators. We have two instructors. They're both full-time captains in Brattleboro. They work 24 hours on, then 48 off, so they share the duties of the instructor. So Dave wants to be spending a little more time with his family as his kids are getting older and working on his older home. So he's been a great asset to us, and I'll work with him and the Brattleboro Fire Department and our current fire instructor on getting a replacement to assist with that. So I'd like you to accept the resignation of Dave Emery as our fire instructor beginning at the end of this semester.
Will we accept the resignation with regret of Dave Emery as fire instructor?
Seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
That's all I have. Excellent. Okay, let's move to central office.
As requested, here's the next installment of information for the boards. It includes all schools in WSCSU minus the Career Center, because remember the Career Center students are incorporated in the BUHS students numbers. So student numbers, screen reduced, FR is screen reduced numbers, homeless, self-explanatory, DCF, Department of Children and Families numbers. Yes, I'll send it along in just a second. Thanks. IEPs are students on individual education plans. 504s are students that have other health impairments, students that have transferred in and students transferred out. Remember, if there are fewer than 10, we do not put in a number because those students become identifiable. And this is a compilation since the beginning of the school year. So those numbers represent from the beginning of the school year. The bottom of this page is just some brief notes from different things I attended. I was asked to present to you different committee meetings that I attend outside of regular board meetings. And then lastly, some upcoming dates, some of which have at this point passed. One of them is January 9th, which I'll be talking about in just a minute. So, any questions? Please send that down to.
Sure.
And I'll be taking some time doing the Act 46, so I won't take more time.
Okay. Excellent. The only thing that I had as part of my report is, and it's kind of related to Act 46, but we'll do this part now. Jill Stahl-Tyler, who is the on the Brattleboro Town Board, has drafted a letter that at least she's going to send as a school board member. Her whole board has looked at it if possible. She asked me to share it with this board. And it's in relation to some of the things we talked about actually during the budgeting process of the State Board of Education's plan to essentially because leaving Vernon the way they are, have an SU, and how then in that SU there would be 3 representatives from Vernon and there would be 3 from the new unified district, and those numbers don't seem appropriately balanced and for other reasons. So Jill drafted this letter, and she asked me to share it with folks here, and I said that I would do that. And really it was in relation to her thoughts related to the Act 46 and the SU, the separate SU, and things like that. So.
Wow.
All right, let's dance. So anyway, so I'm just passing that around. We could have a further discussion about it if people want, but it's a pretty long letter. It's double-sided, and again, it's sort of in draft format. But if you want, I would suggest maybe if you wanted to sign on individually as a board member, you could just be in touch with Jill to do that. Maybe let me go from there. So. That's the only thing that I had separately. All right, so let's move to unfinished business. The first thing we have listed under unfinished business is to take action on the budget, which we had the review of earlier today. And we're going to talk more about Act 46. But just for clarification's sake, maybe it'll muddy the waters, I don't know. But if Act 46 wasn't an issue, merger wasn't an issue, this would be approved. That would then go to our vote, to the voters of the whole BUHS number 6 in mid-February to then go forward to the individual towns. My understanding is with merger is that we would approve this in that then the transitional board that will be put together, that the members of this board would say, our board approved this budget for us, and essentially each individual board would do that, and then what that would give for marching orders for the whole new unified district is that they would merge all of those budgets together into one major budget, essentially. So whether, if and when we merge or how that happens, we as a board need to approve this no matter how it's going to go forward, so that it can go forward. If that makes sense. And I explained that right, Frank? That basically, if we approve this, all the other boards do theirs, and when the merger happens, your first step would be to merge those budgets into one major budget for the unified district.
And consider the implications.
Yep. Okay. So is there a motion to accept?
I'd like some discussion on that, please, if we could, just further.
On what I said, or on the budget itself?
On the budget itself.
Okay, so we need to make a motion to accept it, and then we can have discussion.
Accept.
Yeah.
I would like to make a motion to accept the budget as written at $25,212,000. Do I have that number right? $25,221,000 as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So discussion. Rick.
Can that number change once it gets to this, if it gets to this transitional board?
I don't think it's another transitional board, it would get changed now with the voters, wouldn't it?
My understanding is the transition board will assume the same powers delegated to a school board that are in the Vermont statutes. And so they will have the responsibility to recommend a budget to the newly elected board. And in that process, they could make changes. It's my understanding. But ultimately, it's the newly elected board's responsibility to warn the public meeting for the vote and present the budget for a vote to the electorate of the new unified system. So there's 3 boards involved. In terms of concept, all the individual district boards as they have existed prior, a transition board, and then a newly elected board.
That makes sense. Any other questions or conversation related to that?
I guess I just have a comment about the question raised about using the fund balance to alter the budgetary difference. That fund balance, that's still taxpayer money. It's just where it's sitting. We could use it now, and then we wouldn't have it later when we have an expense and need it. At the end of the day, we're spending $25,221,000 of taxpayer money, regardless of what pocket we take it out of.
Okay, any other?
Well, I guess my response to that would be, you'd be taking less money out of my pocket if you use more fund balance.
That's still your money.
You're not using it to reduce the impact on my taxes. You have the ability to do that, but you're choosing not to. You're choosing to keep it over in the safe spot, and I'm asking you to use an additional $370,000 to bring us up to whatever the 915 is. So that's the profound difference between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about. More money in my pocket when I get my tax bill, less you having it sitting over in a pot someplace else.
Any other thoughts, questions? Russ?
Yeah, just a quick question. If this were the final budget that we were going, and I know things are going to change, would we be over the threshold at this point?
A little bit, yeah.
I'm looking at lines 24 and 22. So in the tax rate computation, is there a penalty included?
A relatively small one, and it's because this is a hypothetical analysis. I thought it didn't warrant further.
I mean, once all I mean, this sort of responds maybe to Rick's question too. Once all the 5.5 boards, however many will be merged, or if that happens, then there'll be some that'll be under, some may be over, so that you're looking at the overall average. So that's why I didn't bring it up before, is because I just thought that okay. I just wanted to see if I was reading that.
Thank you for bringing that to the attention. I would have thought that you would have brought that up, Frank. It is germane. When you're over the cap and there is a penalty, I would think that you would inform everybody that we are over the cap and there is a slight penalty, however slight it is.
Yeah, I did mention that. You may recall I went over the derivation of cost per student, and I did mention the threshold.
I'll have to go back and watch the tape.
It is such a hypothetical analysis that it's probably not time well spent in that, as Mr. Woodworth referred to, the just as significant as any number on the page is the equalized student number. And we don't actually have an isolated number for Brattleboro Union, but we know that where generally equalized student numbers come from, it's a pretty stable statistics. So, that's why I thought it's a reasonable estimate, but it is totally an estimate. There's so many of these variables are subject to change. However, what you're considering now in terms of, I think the most important assumption is what are the resources needed to provide an excellent public education for Brattleboro Union High School, and that's the proposal that you just made a motion for.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? Mr. Rucker, it's Ian Keel with BCTV. You mentioned the budget under discussion right now for BUHS number 6, is that how it's identified, as being somewhat hypothetical?
In terms of budget, I was saying the format of the discussion as it relates to deriving a tax rate.
Okay.
And the difference is, as Sean was just saying, others were just saying, each one of these processes will be merged. And when I say these processes, I'm talking about the Guilford process with their local board, the Dummerston process, the Putney process, and the Brattleboro Town board process. And this process will be merged into a single entity. So you'll have one budget with only one education, equalized student education statistic, and that will derive the true tax rate that the electorate will consider.
And would also have a true cost per student.
Yes.
Which would be spread out amongst all those
That's
entities. Right. And so I guess the question is just, this document obviously is public. Is there any sort of proposed unified budget that exists, even just as a proposed or hypothetical, and when the public might expect to see that?
So that's the responsibility, as we said, of the transition board.
Okay.
Transition board doesn't actually take office until the organizational meeting occurs. Originally, that was scheduled for Wednesday, but I think our superintendent has an update on that at some point.
So if a citizen was interested in what that unified budget might be, they could take these 5 separate budgets and sort of look at them together.
I think as a starting point, that'd be a very reasonable assumption.
Okay. But that unified document doesn't even exist as a proposed budget yet?
No, the board in which that should be considered by doesn't exist either, so.
But is there any rough timeline that one might expect to see that?
I think we'll probably get to that as part of the discussion on Act 46
Yeah.
on the next agenda item.
Thank you, I don't need to take time on that.
No, I just think that we'll get there before the end tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions related to the budget and the motion to approve the budget as presented?
Yeah. Just for the record, Frank, I felt it was very clear in your presentation that we were slightly over the cap.
All right, so if there's nothing else, all in favor of approving the budget as presented to be $25,221,000, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions?
One nay.
One nay. Great. All right, so we passed 7-1. And we'll move on to the next thing under unfinished business, which is Acts 46. Since it's been talked about, we've danced around it, I'm just going to turn it over to the superintendent to explain
What's happening?
What's happening, where we are.
So we were scheduled for our first organizational meeting for Wednesday, 7 o'clock. At approximately 4:30 today, I received information from the General Counsel of the Agency of Ed that all organizational meetings will be postponed. They may not happen before the 3rd week in February. So at this point, we will not be meeting on Wednesday. That means that election of office of new board members, merged board members cannot be set. And this will, of course, push the budget process out till end of March, possibly into mid-April or later. So when, as I said, I just got this information, I've emailed you the exact wording to all board members. Frank and I will start looking at calendars because, of course, there are the 40, 30-day limits that we must adhere to. and we will start to redo a new transition calendar. However, we will not be meeting for approximately a month and a half.
So that means that the election on the Unified Union board members will not take place.
Will not take place.
Town meeting day.
Correct.
So aren't there huge budgetary implication in this information?
Yes, there are.
What was the reason for the delay?
No reason was given. You'll see it in the email that I sent you. Let's see if I can pull it out.
Did it relate to the litigation?
That's the assumption, that it relates to the litigation.
So how would that affect our typical mid-February UHS meeting?
We will.
And we were still going to have that anyway. There were certain articles that had to be considered.
Yes, and the review of this year's budget and that type of thing, yes. Yeah. So Russ, as you're aware, one or more of the forming districts in your supervisory union has filed suit challenging the state board's order. The Attorney General's office has reached an interim scheduling agreement with a number of the districts who filed suit. Part of the interim scheduling agreement will require your new union school district to hold its organizational meeting beginning in the third week in February rather than the date originally warned for the meeting. So there's more to it that you'll...
Yeah, and that's from General Counsel of the DOE.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is Ian Keel, BCTV. Is that email from the AOC a public document?
I do not know.
Is it
was
my
sent-
assumption that an email from a public, that a person in a government entity is
Should be
de
public.
facto public?
Yep.
Is it possible that the district could make that?
Yeah,
accessible?
It can be posted.
Okay, thank you.
So what that, and it was just kind of mentioned too, so that our planned annual meeting on February 12th, where we were not going to discuss future budget at that meeting because by then we would have already had our organizational meeting for the new unified district. So it just would have been about presenting how things have been through the course of this year. There will be a line item, and it's later on under new business, but we will have a warning article related to the budget. And I would assume, and Lyle and or Frank can correct me if I'm wrong, that our February 12th meeting will look very similar to what those meetings look like in the past. That it will be a very similar meeting to that, though we were planning a change, but because that change won't happen until after that meeting is already scheduled, we'll just have a regular February meeting. Yeah, Sean.
I was spending some time on the Agency of Education website today, and one of the things I asked for was a map of the state of Vermont that showed areas that have unified, and I presume it looked to me like the majority of the state has gone ahead and done a unification per the order of Act 46. So I presume all of those areas of the state were not included in what was just
Correct.
mentioned, that we would no longer have an organizational meeting.
This
So
is just the force.
that is specific to the old WSESU, I presume. So we are in limbo because of a reason that we're not really sure exactly what it is. But it is probably because of the contentious nature of the WSESU member towns.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question?
Sure.
This reference to litigation who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant? Is that public knowledge?
The plaintiff are people that are opposed to Act 46. And I would assume it's the State Board of Education. They're the ones that have made the determination that we will merge.
So those are named individuals that we could see? But there's
I have not looked, I've not seen the lawsuits.
Okay.
Was this a decree from a judge?
You know what I know. I do not know, other than we were told that due to the fact that there are school boards in our area that have joined a lawsuit that we need to put our organizational meeting, put it out for now.
But this was a dictate from the Agency of Education.
Yep.
Mr. Gray.
So Ricky, you made reference to the annual meeting, and prior to what Lyle said, there wasn't going to be a line item, a budgetary line item on the warning. Given what she has said, are you saying that you are going to warn the budget that was adopted here this evening?
We have to we have to find that out just because of the late nature of this email that came at 4:30 this afternoon. But
You only have a couple of days left before you...
yeah, but we have to warn that, right? And one of our agenda items later on is to do our warning articles.
So one of the things that I talked to with, or had a conversation with Frank about, the big unknown is if there will be a stay in terms of settling the suit. And if the suit isn't settled by the 1st of July, and there hasn't been a budget adoption by the Union District and or town schools, am I correct in the assumption that we would revert back to the current year's budget on July 1?
Yeah, I don't know. We never seen this develop here, so.
Well, if your budget wasn't approved, if it was voted down at town meeting, and you went to town meeting, your supervisory union meeting, and you had another vote, and it got defeated, you would get into July 1. And at July 1, you'd have to have an operating budget, and until your ensuing year budget is approved, you would fall back to the previous year's budget for funding. Is that correct?
Under existing law, there's a rule that says a school board can borrow up to 87% of a prior year approved budget
That's
to
right.
operate.
That's right.
But there's no restriction that you are subject to the prior year's budget. You simply keep voting until there is a
That's right.
approved plan.
I do get that part. And so, in my discussions, I think that I had with you, or I've talked to several people, is that why wouldn't the district go forward with its vote, and then the vote would become null and void if the unified district, there wasn't a stay, the court said, this is the law of the land, you have to abide by it. Then the vote that was taken on the 12th would become null and void. I would have thought that would have been, and the same thing with all the town schools that hitting March 3rd, they're going to go to town meeting and they're not going to vote on what you're saying here, Lyle. Nobody's going to be voting on any budget. We're just going to sit here and wait until...
Well, and I think you very well could be true, right, that's what we have to do, that we'll be told that on February 12th we'll be doing that, but we don't, as of right now, Monday night, we don't know that for sure, so we need to find that out.
But in the person that I spoke to today, said that I spoke to Donna Savage, Russo Savage, and she was saying that this is the law of the land, and that everybody should make an assumption that this is the law, so therefore you wouldn't be voting on the 12th. And I mean, I disagree with that to a certain extent, just given the fact of what Lyle has said. And actually, she alluded that something was coming down the pike, but she couldn't tell me what it was. So obviously, that's what it was. And I do have a call into the state's attorney's office or the Secretary of State's office to try to get more information, because I'm very concerned about the voting process in terms of representatives on the board.
Yes, John?
Well, I was just wondering, does anybody know whether we will be out of compliance with the law, Act 46, if this delay occurs? So aren't we actually not abiding by a law of the state of Vermont?
Not yet. What we did was schedule our organizational meeting as soon as we possibly could due to the fact that we wanted elections of new board members to happen at town meeting, if possible, and then we wanted to be able to have budgets ready as soon as possible. So.
Sounds reasonable.
Right. So as I believe it's July 1st that we have to be operational.
Have to be operational. It seemed like there was a requirement for within 90 days of the state board action, we would have that organizational meeting.
Yeah, right.
So 90 days from November 30th is technically the latest you could have that organizational meeting. That's what I was saying.
So if you don't have the organizational meeting, then you could be out of compliance with the law.
Yeah.
So
But this court order or this ruling, or whatever this is seems to be superseding that at this point, at this moment right now. So we're
Either that or it's a setting a trap.
hopefully the State Board of Education not doing that, but.
So, I don't know how many board members are up for election, but the elections are still going to go on. And even, say everything went as planned, it's my understanding that this body will still be a board up until December 31st. Is that correct?
Yes, the work of this board goes through June 30th. After that, the new merged board would take over. But anything that pertains to this year, so any audits, anything that needs to be accepted, this board still needs to be in place.
But they have no authority.
Yeah, nothing that happens after July 1st.
But this board does have authority up until June 30th
Yes.
of everything that happens.
Anything else related to Act 46? We may or may not be able to answer anything else, but
I mean, want to say how
we
many
know this
hours that we've spent
on this. Yeah, it's been
pretty discouraging.
yeah. All right, so we're gonna move off from unfinished business to new business, and under new business, speaking of our meeting on February 12th, the first thing is warning articles for the 12th meeting. And February 12th, yes.
Oh.
For the February 12th meeting, which is when our annual meeting was always scheduled for as of last year's annual meeting.
Do you know what time it is?
7 o'clock.
Usually it's 7 o'clock in the gym, yep. So basically, if I'm looking at this appropriately, there's 7 to 8 articles, depending on what happens. And I'll just read them off, and if people want to volunteer to take one, if everybody takes one, we're all good. How's that sound? So the first one is under Article 1, I move that the report of the district officers be accepted as printed.
Take that.
All right. And then the next one is I nominate Steve Brown as moderator to serve for the ensuing year.
I'll take that.
Okay. And then Article 3 is I nominate Barb Nowakowski as clerk to serve for the ensuing year. Everybody wants to nominate Barb. It was always my favorite until I was chair. And then I had other things. Article 4 is I nominate Frank Rucker as treasurer to serve for the ensuing year. Russ is on that one. All right. Article 5 is I nominate Stephen Lemke as Lemke, sorry. Okay, there's a B there, but I was okay. As auditor to serve for a period of 3 years. Okay, and
I think we were going to shorten that to through June.
through June, yeah. But it's to nominate an auditor at least.
Yeah.
And depending what happens.
Because his term ended I think it ends in March, so it's to elect him through June.
Yeah. But there'll
So
be,
our jobs are officially going away, right, as auditors?
For BUHS, yeah.
For BUHS.
Mhm.
Are there going to be auditors in the unified district?
I'm not sure how that gets created, yeah. I'm
yeah,
not sure.
the new formed board would have to create that as part of an annual
I was
meeting.
just wondering, because
Yep.
when I just audited my last budget.
So under Article 6, I move that the Brattleboro Union High School District Number 6 be authorized to issue vouchers for payments of its officers and directors for the ensuing fiscal year, which actually would only be for the remainder of the fiscal year, because it would just be from March to the end of June. And it would be proportional, I'm assuming, based on, right, Frank?
Yeah.
So our stipends would be proportional for those last few months, but we have to officially do that. So the stipend that we receive, which would be proportional to the end of the fiscal year, because as of March, what we voted on last year goes away. So
So are we voting for the next fiscal year and there isn't a next fiscal
no,
year?
we're doing it for the remainder of the fiscal
Is
year.
that the way it works?
Yeah, it'll be worded to the remainder of the fiscal year. I don't see anybody jumping. I'll take that one, that's fine. So, if need be, Article 7 would be related to approving the budget that we approved tonight. So that would be the budget one, but that may or may not be on there based on what we find out. So, does anybody want to take the budget?
Sure.
Yeah, all right. You feel good? All right, so the last one is, which is under 8, is any other business to come before the board. So that would be you, Bob, if we need it.
Sure.
All right. Okay, so that is the assignments. I also have to come around, so no board members should leave until you've signed the 4 copies of the warning articles that are here, so that those can go into the printing. So these will come around to be signed by everybody. So I will sign these really quickly and then pass them around so everyone can sign them, and then they should go back to Lyle to go back to central office before. So she'll take it back tomorrow.
Just a clarification, if there are current BUHS board members whose terms are up, then they would need
They would have to take a petition out.
In what time frame? That would be almost like
28th.
Yeah, by the 28th of this month,
28th of January.
and then return those. And then it would be, for Brattleboro, it would be voted on town meeting day. Well, it would be done for everybody on town meeting day, but it would just be a ballot for us. In Brattleboro. It'd return by the 28th. So if your seat is up, then you need to get a petition by the 28th, and it would really, based on merger, would only be till the end of June. And then it would dissolve with the new entity at that point.
Well, until the end of December, we would have.
You may have to.
May have to do.
Because of
Right.
audits.
Because of audits, but, all right. Anything else related to the warning articles? Those are coming around to be signed. The next thing under new business on our agenda is board attendance review. This is something we do every year at this time, just how everyone did with attendance. I'll just pass this around so everyone can see it individually, what their attendance was, but I will call him out a little bit. Sean gets a gold star for having 100% attendance. He's the only board member that had 100% attendance all of 2018. So congratulations, Sean, on that. But this will just come around for board members to review, so you know what your attendance. Yeah, just initial off that you saw it and you agree with that. If there's a discrepancy or problem with your attendance, you think you were here when you were marked absent, just let's notify that and we'll check that out. The last thing under new business, which is under other for us for tonight, is that Normally, we meet on the first and third Mondays of the month. The third Monday in January is Martin Luther King Day, which is a day that there's not school. There is not school. So we normally do not meet on non-school days. Now the question becomes, the next Monday, there's also no school. So there's 2 Mondays in a row with no school. It's in service, so we could meet if we needed to, because the administration is here to meet. Historically, if I remember correctly, if people correct me if I'm wrong, but normally at this point we haven't done a second meeting in January unless there was a need to do business, because we just finished up the budgetary process and we were going into our annual meeting. And then typically we also only did one in February because we had the one plus the annual meeting in February.
That's correct, from my memory,
Excellent, thank you.
most years.
Yep. So, does anybody anticipate the need for us to get together before the end of January? Is there anything major coming up, anything the administration thinks can foresee that they might need, or that board members?
Are you saying the 28th of January?
Well, I think that if we had to have another meeting in January, it would be the 28th of January. We'd move the 21st to the 28th. Because otherwise, the only other option would be to move it a week from today. And it doesn't make sense to have a meeting a week from today. So if we needed to meet in January, meet on the 28th. And we could warn that ahead of time if need be, and enough time to do that.
I think considering the discouraging news, we had to take a vacation.
Okay. All right, so let's plan on not having a meeting unless there's something that comes up and we need to get together, we need to meet, and then we will do that on January 28th because of the holiday on the 21st. Russ?
Yeah, just a question. I'm looking at the warrants that we just signed, and there's no conditional article about that we just signed about a budget.
Right.
So it may. I mean, I don't know what the lead time is, but we may need a special meeting if it turns out that we need to add that.
We may need to re-sign those if we have to add the one in about the budget.
Yeah. So we may need to have a quick meeting either before the 28th or whatever.
Right. Or you might just get told, please come and sign the warning articles in central office.
If we can do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can or not.
Yeah, we've done that in the past.
And then we can because we discussed it here in open meeting.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So there's been times in the past where it's been, we just need you to come sign stuff and it's at the front desk at central office, and we've just gone and done it. So if we need to add that in, it'll be re-added in, and then you'll just get an email to come by central office and sign it. All right. So we're planned for no meeting on the 21st because of the holiday. If we need to have a meeting, we'll meet on January 28th. Otherwise, our next scheduled meeting would be February 4th. Monday, February 4th. Does that make sense? All right. Is there anything else to come before the board? Yes.
Could I just ask that Finance Committee members hang in for just a second after the meeting so we can try to schedule a meeting?
Yes.
Sean?
I'm sorry.
Finance Committee just to stand by for a minute after the meeting.
Sure.
Just to schedule another meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else to come before the board tonight? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Long but productive meeting.